Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a conversation with Kellyanne Conway and Secretary Betsy DeVos, moderated by Selena Zito.
Hey, CPAC. Hey, CPAC. Is everybody having a good time? So, in case you don't know, this is a special advisor or senior advisor to President Trump, Kellyanne Conway. And Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. So, you guys having a good time? Okay, great. So I thought that it would be really interesting to have you two ladies talk about the president's agenda and what you're doing in the education department, and sort of how education is about the next generation and how important that is. So I think that we should start with talking a little bit about the federal government's imprint, its place in government, and maybe shrinking the size of that. It seems that the president talked about that a lot at the State of the Union address. So if you could both sort of tell me, maybe beginning with you, Kellyanne, talk a little bit about what the president's objectives are, and then how you are carrying those out.
First of all, thank you very much, Selena Zito, a wonderful reporter going all around this country to actually speak to the people about what they want, rather than spending the day on Twitter or Facebook and pretending that she knows what people want. And it's a real pleasure to be here with Secretary DeVos, who's been in the administration practically from day one for President Trump. So President Trump, for the fourth consecutive year, has talked about in his joint session or State of the Union education freedom, whether it's charter schools, school choice, parental choice, certainly education freedom scholarships. The president has made clear, and I'll quote him now, he said, if we can put a man on the moon, win 2 world wars, and dig out the Panama Canal, we ought to be able to provide each disadvantaged child with greater opportunities in their education. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you something. There's probably very few issues where there's more of a bright line distinction between the two parties than educational choice. And I want to tell everybody today, you are either for children or against children when it comes to educational freedom and choice in education. There is no but, there is no excuse, there is no talk of but the teacher unions, but the this, but the curriculum. You either are helping these brown and black children and rural children get more opportunities, or you're not. And I can tell you that President Trump and his administration are, and those who stand in the schoolhouse door preventing these children from leaving and just having other options, other opportunities at a better education to help train them for the future. We believe that education is a quality education is a right. And we believe, as the president has said, that he wants to work with local and state communities and office holders to make that a reality. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania alone, Selena, where you live, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania alone, we have 50,000 low-income school children on a waiting list right now. The Republican legislature has passed the legislation. The Democratic governor there, Tom Wolf, is against it. And he is one of many standing in the way of these children. They're real people. They're not statistics on a page. They have names. They have faces. They have dreams. They have hopes. And they have the same right everybody else has to have a better life. And we're on the right side of that and the right side of history for these school children.
Secretary DeVos.
Well, Kellyanne, you stated it so well, and it is such a privilege to be here with you, and Selena with you as well, to talk about the need for being with and for children. They represent 100% of our future, and yet we know that for far too many kids, they are being failed in schools that simply aren't working for them, that aren't the right fit. We know that over 1 million families are on charter school wait lists. Kellyanne talked about the 50,000 families in Pennsylvania alone. And so it's a real privilege to be serving President Trump and this administration in advancing his goal of ensuring that every single child, no matter their family income, their zip code, any other factor, has an opportunity to access a great quality education. And at the Department of Education, President Trump campaigned on getting rid of Common Core, which was a massive overreach on the part of the federal government. We've done that. He's also campaigned on recognizing the importance of states and local communities and indeed the family in decisions around education. And so our budget this year is proposing turning back a lot of that decision-making and flexibility right down to the local district level. And we're very excited about the prospect of having every district, every school building able to target the resources that the federal government expends in a way that's going to most benefit the most vulnerable and disadvantaged kids. And we need your voices in support to ensure that this gets traction. Because you know what? There's too many people in this city that think the federal government has all the answers for everything. And we know that's not the case.
Where is the Education Freedom Scholarships? First of all, was that a moment at the State of the Union address when that young lady received that? Can you talk a little bit?
Janaya.
Yes. Can you both talk a little bit about where it is and the inception of that?
So Education Freedom Scholarships is a proposal, legislation that's been introduced to dramatically improve opportunities for more than 1 million kids nationwide. We talked about kids that are on the wait list to find their fit in their states and their communities. That are just emblematic of millions of more kids whose families want something different for them. So this proposal is one that would create a federal tax credit in the form of scholarships to give rocket fuel to what states are already doing to advance choices and freedom in education. It's been introduced in both chambers. In fact, Senator Ted Cruz is the lead sponsor in the Senate. And we're continuing to gain support and momentum because the parents and the people want this. 78% of the population supports the idea of Education Freedom Scholarships. It's really a no-brainer, and I am frankly surprised that some on the other side haven't figured this out and embraced it wholeheartedly like they should.
Well, it's not.
What Secretary DeVos says is so important for an additional reason. When you think about the way the monies can be spent under these Education Freedom Scholarships, they certainly can go to tuition, but they can also go to vocational technical education. They can go to summer programs, backpacks, supplies, any number of the regular expenses that end up being quite crushing for many of our families as they decide whether or not they have an additional choice from the conventional public school system and or if they can actually make that choice work for them and their families. So Secretary DeVos talked about the 78% of Americans who favor educational freedom scholarships. When you hear 78%, you know it's a majority of every major group, and indeed it is. It is very high among Hispanic Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, rural Americans, and it has tripartisan support. Among the public, it has tripartisan support. Republicans, independents, Democrats support it. But unfortunately, when it comes to Democrats and Republicans and independents in elected position, particularly in Washington, D.C., you don't see that same level of support reflected in those office holders. And ladies and gentlemen, they're called representatives for a reason. They are sent here to represent the will of the people, and they are lying to their own constituents about their position on education freedom. Look, I can understand why some people have differing views on major policy positions. I am yet, and I mean yet, in doing this for decades, I'm yet to hear a compelling, legitimate, rational reason why people in public office oppose giving disadvantaged children a better shot at a quality education. These Democrats in office, they have exercised educational freedom for their own children. They've put their kids in what they consider to be, quote, better schools. Why deny the same right and the same opportunity to kids in our future? Listen to the people running for president. They're going to give you all kinds of free stuff. You know what? Free stuff sounds great. Freedom beats free stuff any day of the week.
Kellyanne, you're so right. I mean, the hypocrisy of those who've continued to oppose this opportunity. I think about Senator Biden, who's sent his own children to schools of his choosing. I think about, most recently, AOC, who boasted about the fact of getting her goddaughter into a charter school, and yet she's one who would totally wipe charter schools out. Good for me, but not for thee. The hypocrisy is very, very appalling, and it really is two different visions of the world. We stand for freedom and opportunity, and we trust that parents and families are best equipped to make decisions on behalf of their children. And the other side trusts the federal government to make these decisions. Well, they haven't done a very good job, because over the last 40 years since the Department of Education was founded, we've spent over $1 trillion at the federal level alone with the express purpose of closing the achievement gap. Not only has it not closed and narrowed one little bit, it has actually gone wider in some measures and in some communities. This is inexcusable. Inexcusable.
So let's talk a little bit about religious liberty or religious freedom. That was one of the most important tenets in people voting for President Trump that maybe weren't quite sure where they were, but because he was so strong on this issue. But I would love both of you to talk about how that fits into the education system.
Just on the matter of religious freedom, and I'll have the expert herself, Secretary DeVos, talk about it, as goes education. President Trump is the first president in U.S. history to ever have addressed the United Nations General Assembly on the matter of religious freedom, and it happened 5 short months ago in New York, and that was big. It was a wonderful, wonderful address and a fantastic event at a really important inflection point in our world's history, because there are people all across this globe of all different denominations who are suffering, who are persecuted, who are prosecuted, who are oppressed, and often worse, merely because they would like to express their religious beliefs. And the president stood up and spoke out about that. He's been a champion of religious freedoms, but he's also been a champion of religious freedom inside our educational system, including very recently calling for a return of prayer in the schools. And I think for that, we should let the Secretary amplify.
The president has been a real champion for religious liberty, and I was so honored to join him in the Oval Office recently when he signed an executive order restating and reasserting the fact that students, no matter where they are, have the opportunity to express their faith freely and openly. I think too many over the last number of years have taken seriously the freedom from religion piece and not considered the freedom of religion piece and the ability to express it and not be bullied and or discriminated if and when you do. And so we are implementing and making very clear that this is a freedom all of us enjoy, and students in particular have the opportunity to express their faith as protected under the First Amendment.
It's a good opportunity to call out the hypocrites as well on that, Selena, because if I hear one more time, we're woke, woke is a joke. Woke is totally broke. Woke is broke if you're standing in the way of disadvantaged children from getting a better education, and you are pretending that you are for everybody's freedoms and liberties, and you go out of the way to prevent school children from taking a moment of reflection, to take a pause, a moment of reflection, regardless of their denomination. That's the point. That's America. To actually be able to do that and feel free from discrimination or bullying or oppression or ridicule or even eye rolling in the classroom, in the school, in the play yard. And I like to call out all the hypocrites who say one thing and are completely another. Woke, broke, woke, joke. You can have it.
That's great. I think about one of the young women who was at the signing of the executive order, who did something so simple as an extra locker in her school. She said to her fellow students, I'm gonna check this daily, a couple of times a day, and if anybody has a request for prayer, just put it in there, and I'm going to pray for you. And she was told she could no longer do that and precluded from doing that. Well, again, this is something that should not happen, and this president is standing up for all students like that to be able to express something so dear to them and to be an encouragement to others.
So we only have a little bit of time left, but I'd like both of you to maybe peel back the curtain a little bit on two things. Kellyanne, maybe you could talk a little bit about, since you are the president's senior advisor, how this has become such an important thing to him. And for you, maybe you could just share a story of a student that you have met or a family you have met as you travel across the country and talk about these issues and how that impacted you. Kellyanne?
Well, thank you. The president is very impressed with what he's seen from some of the states. We have about 17 states now or so that do have education freedom scholarships. They've got the program in place, and they've gone very well. You look at states like Florida and Arizona, for example, where so many of the students have been able to leverage these opportunities, and so many of those who grant the money feel so good about that because they're going to pay the money in taxes anyway. But the idea that you can actually help students and your future workforce within your state has made a huge difference. The president also cannot believe the split screen, if you will, of on the one side those who are against this, any type of program, before they even hear the details of such a program, don't want to meet with the actual students who would benefit from such a program, refuse to see the labyrinth lines of parents and grandparents standing up in a line just to get a spot in a lottery. It's a random lottery. It's not first come, first serve. It's a lottery, but just to get a spot in eventually what is a random selection process in a lottery for a charter school. He's also a businessman who doesn't do the political speak, and that's benefited him because as a businessman in New York, he watched, and as a New York resident, he watched very carefully what was happening there with charter schools, with the charter school movement, with school choice, how much that has benefited. And it's a free market system. We're trying to supply the demand. We're not creating a demand. We're trying to supply the demand. The demand is there. These parents and grandparents and students, they know. And I'll tell you this about the president. He's made good on his promises to help the forgotten man and forgotten woman in so many different ways. His education reform beliefs and agenda, Selena, they're there to help the forgotten child. And the forgotten child in the education system, we can't wait until they get to college later on and are told, hey, we'll give you to college, we'll send you to college for free. No wonder the Democrats want to give them free college. They've completely prevented them from having a quality education for the previous 12 years, not giving them these opportunities and these options. And so remember, forgotten man, forgotten woman, but if you think of the present education, it's also helping the forgotten child. Thank you.
So well said, Kellyanne. And I'm going to talk about two specific students that I've met. The first one, her name is Denisha. She grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. She was kicked out of third grade and flunked third grade twice, and was on the road to what her mother and her brother did, which was drop out of school. Godmother intervened, found a tax credit scholarship program and school for her in Florida. Long story short, her trajectory totally changed. She'll tell you today she was in school less than 1 week in her new school, and she loved school. She graduated high school, graduated college, and earned a master's degree, and is a true success story. There are millions of more kids like that out there. The other story, the other young man that comes to mind is Sam Myers and his mom, Tara. Sam is a child, or now young man, with Down syndrome. He was in a school that had very low expectations of his ability to learn. His mother and father did not believe them and didn't believe that. Long story short, his mom championed legislation, policy change in the state of Ohio, and Sam, because of that, was able to access a tax credit program, scholarship program there, and Sam thrived in the school that his mom and dad found for him, and he today, he spoke at the White House, it sat across from the president, and then the president asked him what he was going to do in his future. He said he was going to own his own business.
Thank you guys so much. Kellyanne, Secretary DeVos, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Selena.